We are at the most crucial juncture in the history of our country. Nothing's even been close, because I know where we're going to go if they're able to pull this off, and a lot of it, and you do too. And it's not going to be good. America will slowly be dissolved into a globalist system.
Welcome back, everyone. We're sitting down with Curtis Bowers, filmmaker of the Agenda documentary series. And we're going to be talking today about what is happening in the United States. How did we get to this stage? And what will happen if it continues as is? So Curtis Bowers, it's a real pleasure having you on Crossroads again.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, of course, you did these documentaries, these Agenda films, talking about the communist and socialist movements and what they were planning to do in the United States. And a lot of what you warned about 10 years ago, we now see taking place.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's even for someone that studied it for so long, I'm amazed how quickly they've been able to move forward, especially just over the last 4 or 5 years.
So as things currently stand, the elections are still undecided. Trump is fighting back legally, in terms of legal challenges. And far-left groups, even though on one side they have the media playing up like Biden won, they have other groups, far-left groups, actually plotting right now, publicly even to an extent, their protests if he does turn it around. And so they do have these safeguards in place. Now, from your perspective, what are we watching as this takes place?
We're watching the Marxist, which is the main philosophy behind all these groups working together. We're watching them set up a scenario where it's win-win. That's what they always do. They set it up, they shoot for something like getting Biden elected, and they do whatever they need to do to make that happen. But they know sometimes life doesn't go the way you plan. And so they go, well, if he doesn't, how can we still have a win situation? And so they are feeding fuel to the fire of revolution, where I truly believe if Trump is able to get the truth sorted out, where it's clear evidence that he won and he should be president, they are going to then have been able to use this to fuel the fire that started back in Minneapolis at a level 10 times that, because they will have, as they've brainwashed their side to believe they won in a landslide and Biden's the legitimate president, they're going to be able to flip that around, which is another one of their strategies. They always accuse their enemy of doing what they are doing. So they'll be able to say, Trump, it was a fraudulent election. Trump stole it with the Supreme Court, and he's illegitimate. He's a fascist dictator, just like we told you. And so they'll flip it around. So they win then because they have a movement behind them like they've never had before. An anti-Trump movement that really has been brainwashed to believe he is a dictator that will not leave the White House and he must be destroyed. It's illegitimate. So anything we do to stand against him is moral and right and good. They always paint things like Saul Alinsky talked about, always paint yourself as white, Snow White and moral in everything you do, and the other side is black and immoral and evil. And that's what they're setting this up for very clearly. That's why the polls were all off. So it adds more fuel to the fire. See, even the polls said Biden was going to win, and he didn't. So that's what we're seeing now. But it's ancient Marxist philosophy. In the last 100 years, that's the way they've always engaged the conflict, especially in the United States.
Well, and this is interesting based on that, because the way that the public, if you're just watching the mainstream news outlets, these legacy news outlets, if you're only watching them, your perception is they're not even really covering what Trump is doing. There's no coverage really of the hearings, of the evidence coming out on voter fraud. They're not being shown the evidence. And so if Trump does turn it around, it's going to come out of left field for them because they've never heard any of the evidence. They've never heard the arguments around it. They believe that there's no evidence because they've been told that by these media. And they think Trump is just basically on the side, trying to save himself from potential lawsuits or something, or just acting on his ego. And they don't believe that there's anything legitimate to it because the media keeps telling them that. And so if they turn it around, if Trump turns it around, what you're going to have is people out of nowhere. Biden's the president. He's choosing his cabinet. Everything's going well. What's this? Trump just suddenly became president out of nowhere?
That's right.
You would say this is one of their strategies then?
Absolutely. No, it's again, so it's always win-win. They don't want to lose. They are 10 steps past us in every area, planning, strategizing, being purposeful, setting things up so they're going to have a victory here, a victory there. But they're wise enough to know it doesn't always go their way. So we have to plan for both outcomes, where either one will help us accomplish what our end game is. And I, in my heart, from studying Marxist and read all the main writings since Marx, I think they prefer if Trump is able to overturn this and they can do the revolution. They love destruction. That's the ultimate thing, like Vladimir Lenin said, we will have world communism through world revolution. He didn't even want to do what Antonio Gramsci had said, you got to infiltrate and subvert from within. He said, no, we're going for world revolution. So that in the heart of a communist and the Marxist, that's their ultimate end game, is just getting it by power, by just overtaking whatever through just power and force. And so, but we'll see what plays out. But that's what we're sitting right in the middle of right now.
Now, one factor they have now, because if we look back, there have been attempts like this in the past in the United States, going back to late 1800s with the bombing of Wall Street, the anarchist and socialist movements at that time trying to create a revolution in the United States because they thought, like many countries at that time, that it was their turn to bring about these systems in the world, leading up to the Bolshevik Revolution and Lenin and so on. They failed, even though at the time they technically had more popular support. But what they have differently now is they have a lot of the youth, a lot of the college kids, and people, not only the college kids, but even the educated class, ironically, who have gone into government branches and different parts of our government and education systems, teachers, you name it, who have been educated within the framework of this socialist thought. I'm curious, what are we seeing here with this?
Well, what's happening? See, they've always again tried for the revolution. In 1971, a lot of people don't realize it, but just in America, through the Weather Underground, the Students for a Democratic Society, and the Communist Party USA, in just that one calendar year, 1971. They did 1,900 bombings of buildings in America. A lot of us have forgotten that. That's the thing in the past. They thought they were going to be able to stir up the Marxist revolution then, but it just kind of fizzled out because there was still too much of Judeo-Christian principles ingrained in our society from the founding of our country. Just the Bible influence was so strong that people weren't going to rise up and start killing each other off. But that's been like the 45 current communist goals from the 50s. If you look at those, a lot of those are focused on making us an immoral people, turning us away from God and absolute truth, so they can raise a generation that is not moral, that does not do things the right way. And so that's what's happened. So they've now had a couple generations that they've raised to believe if it feels good, do it. And things like that, where there's not a morality at all. And so now they're thinking, hey, I think we've got enough troops trained. If we start the revolution this time, if we start to burn down the buildings this time, they're going to join us. And we found out this summer, they're right. There's enough of them that have been raised to hate America, thinking it's the most evil country that's ever existed. They haven't been taught American history. They haven't been taught about this country, even with its imperfections, has continued to overcome those and perfect them and make things right. They've not been taught any of that except, oh, America is horrible and has to be done. I remember I saw a banner not too long ago from Black Lives Matter protest, and they were carrying it down the streets, and it said, America is over. And I thought it was just sobering to look at that. That's their end game. They're not stopping until America is over.
Well, it's another big piece of this too is when a lot of Americans look at what's happening now when it comes to big tech, big media, and big government working hand in hand to basically, before the votes are over, before counts and recounts are over, before legal challenges are done with, and Trump still has a strong chance at winning through these. Before this is over, they've declared Biden the winner. And even when for example, the people in charge of transition refused to acknowledge it, what happened? They threatened that woman and her children and forced their hand to allow the transition to take place. Now, in my analysis, you would not see them behave in this way if they felt confident that the normal course of action would lead to the results they want, because it would be more valid that way. If they allowed the investigations to take place, if they allowed these things to happen, it would look more valid because it would settle down the crowds. It would help validate what they want. And the fact that they are not allowing that, I think, really strongly demonstrates their lack of confidence that that the final outcome of that will be in their favor. But this brings up one big thing that a lot of people watching these things play out are seeing, which is it looks like a coup. It looks like a soft coup. And this is making a lot of people say, well, at what point do we call this treason? What are your thoughts about this?
Well, it's true if it's able to go forward. And Biden gives the inaugural address on January 20th. We've got big problems here because it is treason. It's our most precious thing we have, our ability to select those who will represent us in our government so that our rights will always be protected and we'll always be able to live as free people. The Democratic Party is undermining that. That's the most precious thing we have. Because without a free election, you don't have any freedom at all. It's just one moment away from martial law or whatever they want to do. Because once they know they cannot lose power, you do whatever you want to do, as has happened in so many countries in the 20th century. We saw the outcomes of that. So it is absolutely treasonous activity, but it's worse than that because it's erasing America as we know it. That's how America was different than any other country. We had the form of government with the systems in place where the people are the ultimate power. That we, the people, were the sovereigns. And the government was under the people, the public servants. And they've, over the last 30, 40 years, turned that, where they've started to be more authoritarian. But I don't know. I don't even have the answers, Joshua, for that, because I don't know. But it's so serious. That's what I would want people to know listening to this. We are at the most crucial juncture in the history of our country. Nothing's even been close, because I know where we're going to go if they're able to pull this off, and a lot of it, and you do too. And it's not going to be good. America will slowly be dissolved into a globalist system, and it will have lost. It's the hope of the world. I mean, so many countries, they see America as maybe someday we can get there, or someday we can be like America. And to remove that, as the globalists have always known for 100 years, if we want the world government, world governance, world control, America has got to go. And that's why it's been so focused on us. But this is kind of a final level now to capture a presidential election and put your man in power when he did not win. We're in a serious situation.
Well, looking at the reasoning behind this, well, let's step back first. Let's talk more about the idea of treason and the idea of subversion. Because subversion, to basically whittle away a country from within, or whittle away at a system from within, is sedition. And if we go back, this was again part of the big discussion. At what point do we call what these individuals are doing treason and sedition? And there was a lot of tolerance for it as these things developed, going up through, again, if you were in the past, under the Soviet Union at that time during the Cold War, the world revolution, right? The globalists of that time, the world communist revolution being pushed by the Soviets. And I have friends, who are Chinese, who say, when I hear globalism, we grew up under that. That was the International. That was the Communist International. That's what they called it. That's just a different name for the same exact thing. That was the Communist International. International communist movement, globalist movement. It was the exact same thing. And when they talked about that at that time, the Soviet Union was leading it. And if you were part of the Communist Party USA, you were under the Soviet Union. That was part of the Soviet system. At that time, that was acting on behalf of a foreign government to commit sedition on American soil. But the charges on that never really took place. Now, what happened with these movements that started at that time, and their movements to subvert our government at that time?
Well, if you really look back, when FDR passed the New Deal, the size of government almost doubled overnight. And so the communists were waiting in the wings, and there's so many great books on this that show that, but they were waiting in the wings, and they moved into agriculture, education, anything possible just to get into government, to start to get influence where they could move around, they could hire fellow travelers into positions of influence. A man named Whittaker Chambers came out and said, he had been a communist spy himself, he'd become a Christian and realized if there is a God, then communism can't be right because it's an atheistic system. So he turns from them, he runs and hides in Florida. But then he realized, I have to expose all my friends in government that are taking this down. And his very best friend was a man we most have heard of, Alger Hiss, who was the right-hand man of FDR. He was the one that was put in charge of setting up the United Nations, and he was at the Yalta talks with FDR to set everything up for the Soviet Union to help them be able to explode right after World War II in growth and take over Europe. But he came forward and said, he's my best friend and he's a communist spy because I know it. And Harry Dexter White and all these other ones. Well, just to show how much the Democrats had been influenced and were friendly toward communist thought back then, they never investigated his claims. They just attacked him and said, how dare you call someone a communist? And so nothing was done. Then the famous, in the 1950s, Senator Joseph McCarthy came forward. He goes, I got a list of 200 people here that are Communist Party USA members or fellow travelers. Did they look into that? No. They just, how dare you call someone a communist? So they'd never been taken out, and they keep hiring from within. They keep trying to get more influence to make everything anti-American in our State Department and all throughout the government. The deep state today that we all talk about, all that is this movement that never was rooted out, never was investigated, and it's grown and grown where it's just a Marxist movement inside of our own government, but it's been there for 90 years. And so they know not to call themselves Marxists or communists. They're progressives now. But that's what's happened. That's why this thing is so deep and wide. Why the Department of Justice is against our own president of the United States. Instead of working with him, they're against him. All these things people look at and go, how could that have happened so quickly? It wasn't quickly. It was over 90 years it happened. And M. Stanton Evans wrote a book called Stalin's Secret Agents. And it was the last book before he died. He was a Yale researcher, an incredible friend of mine, incredible, brilliant guy. And he documents in there from declassified congressional record, FBI files, KGB files, CIA. He documented that we now know today, beyond a shadow of a doubt, FDR and his administration had over 200 communist spies. 200, not two, which would have been significant. 200. And they've never been taken out. So that's why this movement has so much power. And as the Frankfurt School in the 30s talked about, and then the communist schools from the 1950s that were read into the congressional record in 1963, we got to take over media, education, and Hollywood. The three main institutions of influence so we can change the people from within. And that's what they've been doing now for a long time.
In your eyes, where is this country heading? Let's look first if Biden wins.
Well, if Biden wins, again, they're not hiding as much anymore. He's telling us what he's going to do. And there's so many serious things. The Build Back Better slogan that you were talking about, that of course is from the World Economic Forum. Well, they put out their goals the other day for 2030. So just 10 years from now, goal number one, and their prediction for 2030 is you'll own nothing and be happy. That's them. And so, I mean, it's not socialism we're heading to, it's communism. It is the only way. And then Kamala Harris, her little video maybe a lot of people saw, talking about equality compared to equity. And she explains them very clearly. You can watch this online, but she says equality is where everybody gets the same thing. Well, that's socialism. She goes, that's no good. Because if we started at different parts, different spots to begin with, some people will be ahead of others. She goes, we need equity. And equity is the way she just defines it, is communism. She says at the very end, equity is when everybody ends up in the exact same place. Well, the only system in world history that has held everybody in the exact same place is communism, because we all have different talents, different motivations, different abilities. So to keep them there, it has to be totalitarian. So that's who will even be the president in short order, but that's the world we're going into. Goal number 2 of the World Economic Forum, which he will do whatever they tell him to do, they're kind of the brains of the operation, is that the U.S. will no longer be the world's leading superpower. That's their own goal on their own website, and they have tremendous influence. The United Nations was a political outfit that never quite got the traction for world government. But now they're adding an economic element to it as they combine forces, the World Economic Forum, to give this whole thing legitimacy. I believe it's what's going to be used to try to work toward world governance at first and then world government. But if we go where Biden is wanting to go, he said in the first 100 days, some of the things he talked about, he's going to pass the Equality Act. Well, what does that do to the First Amendment? We'll lose the freedom of conscience, the freedom of religion, and the freedom of speech, because he will demand, no matter what your beliefs, you accept their version of morality, which is the absence thereof, instead of whatever you religiously believe is true and right. And so it just, think of the Second Amendment. They're going to start the Second Amendment. He's already said, yes, we've got to outlaw all these different assault weapons. Kamala Harris has told us in her own words from some briefs she wrote, I believe the Second Amendment is only talking about a government-run militia. She goes, I do not believe an individual has a right to bear arms at all. So that's the world. So we're moving into a world where the Constitution disappears into nothingness. And it is going to be totalitarian. Not at first, it never is. They have to get more levers of control, healthcare, and different things where they have enough power to then make you pay if you resist. The government has to be in position where they can deny you a job or deny you a place to stay. So they still have some work to do, but that's the road we're heading if Biden is elected. And that's in their own words. You can go to CNN and look, I was reading today, the list of all the things he's going to do within his first 100 days. And all of them are anti-American and things that will destroy our country from within. So that's the reality of what will happen if Biden is allowed to move forward.
And if Trump turns it around, what do you see happening?
If Trump turns it around, it'll be great. But, I mean, because he will have 4 more years with us behind him, helping him dismantle the beast of government in America that is just so far beyond what it's supposed to be, disconnecting us from all these world organizations that have nothing in mind except bringing America down so they can have their world government. But, like I talked about earlier at the beginning, the Marxist will, if that happens, will paint the narrative that Trump is a dictator. He will not leave the White House, even though Biden clearly won, like you said, because they haven't talked about any of these issues. No one hardly knows in America that people are concerned that the election was free and fair, because they just ignore it as if it doesn't happen. All they're talking about is President-elect Biden and what he's doing. So it's going to be, I think people need to be prepared, because I think it's going to be a revolution attempt by the Marxist at a much higher level than we've seen before. Because now all those groups too, because they were able to deceive people what they're really about, like Black Lives Matter, they have the money now too. I mean, they've been getting millions and millions of dollars in donations from Walmarts and all these top corporations funding them because, oh, that's an in group, that's a good thing, oh, we'll fund them. Well, a Marxist doesn't waste money. If they have it, they're using it for their one goal, world revolution. And so they're right now, I guarantee you, working behind the scenes to be ready, if that happens, to have it just explode overnight through our cities. Again, at a level, I believe, and I hope I'm wrong, but I just know who they are, where we're going to have chaos like we've never seen before. And I don't know what will come out of that, but we need to stand as Americans for freedom, regardless of the cost, stand for what is right, back our presidents, and then even in 2022, get our Republicans out of there, the ones that have been playing games and aren't really behind the agenda to make America great again. And we need to keep just working toward this movement to remake America into what it once was, and to stop the movement, to transition it into a socialist, communist utopia on earth, because we know from history it doesn't produce that. And for our children and grandchildren that are very important to me, that's why I do what I do for my children, we cannot stop fighting for what is right when the cost in their life is going to be so high. We're not giving them the same America we were given. And so we need to use our energies, our resources, and our time to stand for what is right.
Now, Curtis, just last question. You've been watching these things for decades. You've read their books, you've made films about it, you've exposed these things. if you were to leave us with one thought in terms of where the country is at right now, if you want to tell us one thing that what you think is the most important thing right now, what would it be?
That's a tough question. Well, I like to leave people on the up instead of the down. The up is, it looks like at least 80 million people voted for President Trump. That's encouraging. You're not alone. The people listening to this, you're not alone. They want us to always feel like we're on the out, we're the, the minority, whatever. We have 80 million strong of people that said, we want freedom. We want to keep America great. And so that's encouraging. So we need to be engaged at the local level, connecting with like-minded people, getting behind good candidates, getting good people to run, and stay engaged in this battle. It is a battle for our country, and we need to stay engaged and use our time and our energies. Those that are Christians, you need to be praying for our country. That's important. We need God's help in this, because just like our founders knew, without God's help, they would never be the strongest country in the history of the world, in Great Britain when they took them on, but they did. And so we need to do what we can do to at the local level, one person at a time, to educate and inform and share good information with, so we keep swelling our ranks and trying to always work toward getting the hearts and minds of our young people back on our side, where they are patriots for freedom in this country, because it's a battle we're fighting, and it's giving us all a very meaningful life of standing for the truth.
Okay, Curtis, thanks again for being on Crossroads.
You're welcome.